If you saw my previous video, I guess you can understand why I'm making this one. Thinking I'm going to go through all the Axis and Allies games in order by release. So this is the third one on the line, which would be the Europe version out of 1999. This is just going to be a brief look at it though, but in all the versions, I think this one really makes, Germany look daunting, I would say. Even in Europe 1940, since that map has Africa on it and the Italians on it and the French on it, the Germans just feel a lot smaller. I think the color scheme that they did was really interesting, and I actually really like the tan color that they gave the Germans. Even though it doesn't match with the pieces at all, like tanned territories for the dark German pieces, green for the tan British, blue for the green Americans. The only ones that match are the Russians over there in red. I have to admit that the Russians seem a bit sparse on their territories and a bit sparse on the infantry. Now, like in total fashion, I have 2 game boards and 2 boxes for the game. The Convoy System, what this version did compared to the previous version. While the previous version, it simplified, the classic did, this one had a lot more complexity, which is, I think is really what was needed. We have these convoy zones, they take away the income, they added in destroyer ships, they added in artillery. Each nation now has their own individual artillery. Some of the modifications they did, I don't agree with as much. The whole situation in the Middle East where the Allies don't get money from it, but the Axis do if they take it, I find it a bit weird. Also, I find it weird how there's nothing in Libya at the start of the game. There's nothing in Vichy, France at the start of the game, but I guess I can sort of understand that from the historical stance. But seriously, nothing in Libya. There's just no war in North Africa right here. It was entirely fictional. You've been lied to this whole time. And at the fact that there's no real way to reinforce these Allied units, besides if the Russians came down here, but the Russians are going to be dealing with a lot because from what I've sort of heard is that the main thing the Germans are just going to do is just race towards Moscow. That's really all. Though the Russian unit in Iran is a nice touch because the Russians did occupy northern Iran. Later versions of Axis and Allies, they just always had Iran be controlled by the British. So it's a nice detail to have there. Of course, this version and the territories labeled on here I believe would serve the inspiration for the Europe version that eventually came, except Europe didn't have Africa, of course. Europe 1940 has Africa, of course. They still have the IPC track on a sheet, which is nice. I don't like it when it's directly on the board. Kind of a bit weird. The organization, it's not as great as classic. This is how I have mine organized. I bought it used, so I don't know exactly how it's supposed to be organized. Besides the fact that they have like a rounder symbol underneath it, which is a cool detail, but it's nothing like classic where you had all the nice spot for every single type of piece. The rulebook over here with actually a very nice big giant cover art. Same thing with that over there. And this feels like almost the first, more towards the modern rules of Axis and Allies. What would Axis and Allies be today if we didn't have the destroyer ship? If we didn't have artillery land units? Some things, of course, are not clearly defined in. They didn't have numbers for the sea zones yet, so they had to come up with a name for every single sea zone, which sometimes looks a bit odd. I do have to admit, this is one of my favorite looking art styles. There's something about all the lines, the lines that are coming off the coast here, and the slight gradients of the mountains. And it has a lot of light colors. The later versions tend to have, I don't want to say much more bolder colors, but I think they have bolder and more vibrant, but the lightness actually brings quite a bit to it. Of course, who would I be except someone who owns 2 copies of it? And I have the pamphlets here, the Avalon Hill games. This is the early pamphlet. And we see some of the other games they did, because when this came out, Avalon Hill had sort of just been bought in by Hasbro. The Avalon Hill company was having quite a few financial difficulties, and they sold to Hasbro. Hence, Hasbro transferred the rights of Axis and Allies from Milton Bradley over to here. Still a bit sad that Avalon Hill got bought by Hasbro, because Avalon Hill was making amazing games. If you look what they were making games about history 10 times more detailed than any version of Axis and Allies. Of course, they didn't have plastic pieces. They didn't have that type of budget. So the quality really stepped up now. But, if it never happened, we wouldn't have had all the glorious versions of Axis and Allies we do now. A lot of other nice games in here, though. I could do videos on a lot of these if I want to. Cosmic Encounter is a great one, and same designers who made the Dune game that got printed recently again. Battle Cry, there's a huge series that spawned off of Battle Cry, with many great versions of it, and then there's our Europe game that we see. Diplomacy, Acquire, great game by Sid Saxon. Let me know if you ever want me to do a brief look at any of these games. Diplomacy, Acquire, Battle Cry, Cosmic Encounter. I don't have these exact versions. Like, I have an older version of Diplomacy, older version of Acquire. I do have this version of Battle Cry, though. That first edition version. And, that's at the dawn of the 2000s. It's a really interesting logo. Very different. The old Avalon Hill logo was just red box and then white letters AH. And now you get this planet sort of thing happening here. This is the later one. With a lot more pages we get. They came out with the revised, the D-Day, the Pacific version, which unfortunately you can't merge with this. It's like the dumbest thing. You can't even merge them together. So that's partly why they made Global later. New Risk, Betrayal, it's a good game. Monsters Ravage America. This actually was, Menace America. This was actually one of the Avalon Hill games, one of the last games they ever made. Because they were trying to make something that the general public would be more interested in, but it wasn't that great. Nexus Ops, though, that's a great game. It's it has, the rolling dice of Axis and Allies, but it's fast-paced, It's like Axis and Allies in 2 or 3 hours is what you get. Of course, it's not historical at all. I'll give playing times here. But honestly, Europe signals sort of the next era of the Avalon Hill games and the Axis and Ally games to follow, even though, it's still a bit rough. They still haven't worked out all the kinks, I think. But they are starting to create new standard. It's like the standard of not centered roundels. But this version, I think it's one of the first versions, besides the variants and stuff, that showed how much variability the future versions of Axis and Allies could have. So that's my brief look at Axis and Allies. Yup.